What's up, guys? You're listening to another late July edition of the SplashTag Podcast. I'm your host, Matt, and today I'm once again joined by my good buddy Sid. We're going to talk a bit about Chris Paul, both where he's at right now, what we anticipate, this final chapter of his career looking like, and just kind of what Chris Paul's career has been so far. And the reason we're discussing that is because unfortunately, free agency, the most of the major dominoes and the musical chairs has stopped, and the only one of the big things right now, kind of the recent discussions that we hear from insiders is like, will OKC be able to move Chris Paul? And there's obviously this dilemma of his contract and him wanting to win and play for a contender and whatnot. So without further ado, I think like the third time in the last month, I'm joined by Sid. How you doing, man?
Doing pretty good, man. Good to be back. Third time's the charm. Let's do it.
Obviously, always love talking hoops with you. So I guess let's get right to it. I had kind of thrown the idea out to you. I said, hey, I should get you on a podcast to kind of discuss, Chris Paul's career as a whole and just kind of past, present, future. So I guess my first question to you is, let's think about everything, these first, 14 years of Chris Paul's career. If let's say Chris Paul's career ended today and that was it, and then in like 50 years or however many years, way down the line, you're telling your grandkids, I remember Chris Paul for blank. Fill in the blank.
I would describe him as, of course, a very good point guard, one of the best I would say multiple generations of the NBA, and I would say he was seen as the best pure point guard for a certain number of years when he was in the league. And it was always up for debate as to, Chris Paul and someone else as a top point guard in the league. So I would that's mostly how I would describe him as far as how good or great he was. But I would of course would not leave out the fact that he was also known for his lack of playoff success, really, and for the first 12 seasons of his career, he'd not made a conference finals. He finally did in his 13th season, which was a season ago in the 2018 playoffs with the Houston Rockets. Finally got to the conference finals, and of course ended up getting injured in Game 5. And that ended up being a pretty tough blow for the Rockets. I do think that will be brought up a lot too, as far as Chris Paul's career as a big what if.
Yeah.
Especially if there's 30 for 30 on his career, which I'm sure there will be. I can definitely see that series being a huge part of it. In addition to the Clippers Rockets series in 2015, because that was another very good opportunity that he had to make a deep run, and they fell short, blew a 3-1 lead. So, it's going to be a lot of remembered, I think, for a couple what ifs, and I mean, still a very good career, but he won't be, of course, remembered the same way. I think got obviously championship point guards like, of course, Steph Curry will be remembered.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of the points kind of I was thinking of. Like, there is no doubt he is, when you're talking, true floor general guy that's going to roll out of bed and get you 20 and 10 and compete on the defensive end. Like Chris Paul is probably literally embodies that. When you, in terms of how defining like a point guard. And it's not like I'm gonna bring up another example. A lot, up until this year, there was this narrative of like, oh, Kyle Lowry shrinks in the moment in the playoffs. He's a regular season player. Not that I ever really subscribed to that, but that was a narrative out there. And what's
Yeah.
interesting to me is for all of Chris Paul's lack of postseason success per se, that people will remember him so far for, it's not like he's been bad in the playoffs. So but at the same time, it is so interesting to me that, and I'm sure we're gonna hit on this in a couple minutes, but like, there's been so many, I don't know if meltdowns is the right word, but just like so many what ifs and like oh, they should have had that kind of those. There's so many moments in the playoffs where you look and it's like, oh, they should have had that, you know, or like, oh, they were just that close. Obviously, the biggest one is 2018 conference finals. He gets hurt, and then they proceed to lose, game 6 and 7 to Golden State. But, I think about game 6 against the Rockets in 2015 when it's like they're at home, they're up big. James Harden, Kevin McHale takes James Harden out of the game because James Harden was not, his body language was poor, and he wasn't really being, the MVP caliber player that he can be. And then he puts in Josh Smith, Jason Terry, Terrence Jones, like some dudes who are out of the league now, and they just start raining threes, and they beat the Clippers. I also think about 2014 Game 5 against Oklahoma City, series tied 2-2.
Right.
So it's just like there's just so many of these moments where it's like it wasn't like Chris Paul quote unquote choked or anything, but it's like I don't know. Is it just a consistent thing of like bad luck? Also, I guess to add another example, in 2016, Steph got hurt in the first round playing against the Rockets. So a lot of people started kind of forecasting ahead, and they were like, "Ooh, could the Clippers play a Warriors team without Steph?" And then they asked Doc Rivers about it, and Doc Rivers was like, "Hey, injuries are part of the game. Like, we don't feel sorry for anybody." Before they had even beat Portland, and then the next game, I think Chris Paul got hurt and then was out for the series, and then Portland ended up beating them. So there's so many of those moments, I guess, in Chris Paul's career, which I think makes his career really, really fascinating and unique to kind of look at.
Yeah, that's true. It just seems there was like a phantom then or a curse, and each year it was something different. Like, I mean, of course, and multiple times there have been an injury that happened at a bad time that really hurt his team's chances, and then of course there were a couple occasions of being in a really good position to beat both in 2014 against the Thunder and then 2015 against the Rockets. He was in a very good situation, and like, not just in the series, but during the game itself, and having a lead and being on the verge of going to the conference finals and not being able to get it done. So, yeah, it's just gonna be looked at as just he knocked on the door, just couldn't get through it. So.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think now, like how many years, and you don't have to give an exact number, but like what time period do you think that he was considered the best point guard in the league? Because I personally think that he was probably the best point guard in the league for his first 3 Clippers years. So like 2011, so the lockout year until 2013-14, I would think, right?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that definitely sounds like the right ballpark before Steph's ascension to being the point god. And yeah, like the Clippers years, he was definitely really good, and those teams were of course always in the mix of things. I'm trying to think about who are the other rival point guards during those years, aside from Steph when he kind of busted into the scene in 2013. I
Yeah,
think Tony Parker,
Tony
he was
Parker, Russell Westbrook.
Westbrook. Yeah, I mean he was also Westbrook was definitely a worthy comparison back then. Um, Yeah, I mean Rondo was still really good in 2011, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. For me, I think his first 3 years with the Clippers, like I think those 3 years were probably his apex. Interestingly, I really do think that, I hate to admit this, but like I really do feel like in 2015, if they got to the conference finals against the Warriors, like not that I don't think they would have necessarily beaten the Warriors, but I think that's like a 50-50 series.
yeah, I think that was his. I mean, that was his best chance of winning the title with the Clippers, like easily. And yeah, 50-50 sounds about right. That would have been a bloodbath. I think that series would have gone to 7. And I would say, I mean, it's hard to really know because we're going off hypotheticals. If they get to the finals and face the Cavs, if the Cavs run into the injury trouble that they ended up running into against the Warriors, well, actually they lost Kevin Love before the Warriors series,
Yep.
so you assume that happens. You assume that Kyrie's knee kind of gives out. Man, I mean I can't see the Clippers losing to the Cavs unless, of course, they had a choke job in the finals.
Yeah.
So I mean, they realistically could have been 2015 NBA champions if you really think about it.
Yeah, and like imagine in 2015, let's say Chris Paul does win the title and he hits that game-winning shot in Game 7 against the Spurs. Like, how differently do we look at Chris Paul versus, where we're at now, where he's got this hefty contract and he's considered one of the most unmovable, contracts in the league, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh my God. Yeah, I think it would have. I mean, it would have been a totally different scenario. Like, he would have honestly been it would have been another sort of Dirk Nowitzki story where he
Yeah.
had a lot of playoff disappointments and so many what ifs and for many years, and then finally being a veteran player, but also still in his prime, still like an all-star superstar player, and leading the team to a title. So yeah, I think you're right. The narrative would have been very different because that Game 7 shot, um, we of course still remember it and it was spectacular, but I don't think it gets talked about that much because it was just seen as, I guess, a preview for what was about to happen in the second round, when they were because that happened before they blew the 3-1 lead.
Hmm.
So yeah, it doesn't really get talked about much or remembered much.
Yeah, um, definitely. Yeah, I definitely feel like that's kind of swept under the rug a lot of times. Like I said, it's not like in a lot of these playoffs, Chris Paul has played well, and I think that is like one of his best kind of that Game 7 as a whole. But that right there is probably his postseason moment, maybe that or him having what 40 and 12 to close out the Jazz and then go to the conference finals. But
Yeah,
um, I do feel like that is like his postseason moment, and it comes against a good Spurs team that was the defending champs in a Game 7. But it's just like I don't know if people are gonna remember that, unless like you and I watched that game, so of course we'll remember that, but I just find it very interesting that like a dude who has actually been good in the postseason, but just and has had so many like kind of pivotal moments that they just came up short, and now that's just kind of how he's remembered for the time being, unless he changes that, in these last couple of years that he's got.
yeah, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think the Dirk Nowitzki comparison right there is great because like, the cliche is like you're always a loser until you're not, or whatever it is. Like you're always a choker until you're not. It's like
Yeah,
that was the big knock on Dirk, and then Dirk finally gets it done through in 2011 through. Let's not forget a very tough road. Like there were they didn't play any chumps in that path to the title. Um,
yeah, not at all. I mean, a lot of people actually picked Portland to beat them in the first round that year.
yeah, Speaking of Portland, we're recording this on Brandon Roy's birthday. So birthday shout out to Brandon Roy.
Oh,
Wish
happy birthday, Brandon Roy. We'll never forget what you did to the Mavs
you
2011 Game 4. Oh, my
he
God.
it not to go on too far of a tangent, but like it is such a bummer that he got hurt and I had to retire early because I always felt like he was right behind Kobe and Wade. He was that next shooting guard in line.
Oh, yeah. Very true. I mean, he just had that it factor. He could take control of a game and was unstoppable. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, but what had happened because he definitely had showed some flashes of what he could have been had his knees held up.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but transit kind of talking again, bringing it back to Chris Paul. I'm gonna pose a question for you. So, um, it seems like I Chris Paul. It's no secret he is a very fiery, competitive dude. You know, he's constantly chirping on the court, whether it's to his teammates, like communicating, or he's you know yapping with the refs. This is no secret. I'm not trying to, shit on Chris Paul. This is what you get with the Chris Paul experience. You
For
combine
sure.
that, the fact that he's a very strong personality, factor that and that in a lot of most of the time that's a good thing, right? You want your point guard to be the heart and soul of the team a lot of the times, and you want someone who's going to compete night in, night out, and you want someone who has a high basketball IQ and is willing to challenge what is being proposed by the coach if the coach isn't putting everyone in the best position to succeed, et cetera, et cetera. But all that said, he leaves LA and it seems like he didn't really leave on the best note with a lot of his teammates, most notably his fellow superstar Blake Griffin. Um, same kind of deal in Houston. It seemed like there were times where he and Harden were not quite seeing eye to eye, and it seemed like D'Antoni wasn't really great with managing that relationship. Um, he also it seemed like he and Doc Rivers went back and forth quite a bit. I say all that to say, you know, considering all that is and you know me, I don't really like the GOAT legacy like ranking players, but all that said, can you if you started a basketball team, like you were an expansion team and you could have Chris Paul's and you could take Chris Paul at the beginning of his career and have him for the next 10 years or take Steve Nash, a guy like Steve Nash, don't you feel like a lot of the kind of the fieriness and the tension that came and the drama, don't you feel like you have to go with like a Steve Nash?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, knowing what I kind of looking back at both their careers and um, actually a little bit similar as far as the playoff disappointments. Just there's a bunch of what ifs with Steve Nash as well, but not to go on a tangent. But yeah, I mean, you definitely like made a lot of valid points about just Chris Paul and his reputation and um, what it seems to have been like playing alongside him for his teammates, and then you compare that with Steve Nash, and there hardly seem to have to be any hardly any hardly any attention. It was seems like Steve Nash is still best buddies with the guys he played with, notably Dirk, and I mean, of course, both were all-star point guards for many years of their careers, and um, it was they're two of the best. So kind of putting them side by side with their playing abilities, and then of course you bring their character and like the intangibles, leadership, how they mesh with other teammates. I mean, it seems that Steve Nash the would have the upper hand as far as who you want to build your team around. But of course, I mean, yeah, where Chris Paul has an edge over Nash would probably be the defense. I mean, he always brought it. Yeah, had the tenacity. So, but if aside from that, I think Steve Nash has the edge.
Yeah, and I just want to preface that by saying like I think Chris Paul is like I think he's a good teammate in that like he sticks up for his guys and he's by all means from what I've read he's like an inclusive dude. He doesn't look at himself as like oh I'm too good to talk to you because you're the 15th man and whatnot. But that said, I do wonder if there's just something about Chris Paul's demeanor and whatnot and that makes him a little and part of it is just the fact that he's a little more ball dominant. I wonder if that makes him as a point guard just like a little bit more difficult of a point guard to play with than say like a Steve Nash or a Steph Curry,
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it definitely seems like he needs to have the ball in his hands. Like he doesn't really do much of playing off the ball. Versus Steph Curry, who he moves super well without the ball, and like, obviously that Golden State offense and flows like superbly with whether Steph Curry has the ball in his hands or not. So from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, I think for teammates, I would say they definitely enjoy and appreciate a guy like Steph Curry or Steve Nash more than they would for Chris Paul.
Yeah. Obviously, kind of definitely an agreement there. We've talked quite a bit about like, kind of the past for Chris Paul. Let's go to the present and the future, just kind of what we expect. So obviously, it seems as though he's, in this final chapter of his career. And, one thing I actually just thought about was not to say that their careers have been, totally identical or anything, but now that I think about it, there's a lot of parallels between Chris Paul's career and Jason Kidd's career. And interestingly, Jason Kidd kind of towards the end was able to reinvent himself a little bit, and he finally captured that title and to where now like Jason Kidd's career kind of feels complete. So I'm just curious, like, what do you foresee for this last chapter of Chris Paul's career? Do you think he's gonna? This might be a little kind of too much of a crapshoot, but like, do you think he's gonna wind up on a contender, or do you think that the contract situation and whatnot, like it might be tough, you know?
Well, definitely the contract situation makes things very complicated, and I can't see any realistic contender wanting to take that and hurt their chances. But if that contract could kind of be worked with um, somehow, as in, you know, I'm not really sure what the options are right now for OKC and what they're gonna do with him. Are they just gonna trade him somewhere else? Is he just gonna sort of hop around and be somewhat of a journeyman, or is he just gonna get bought out and or waived and be able to actually pick his own team or and try to find a contender that has mutual interest? If I had to think about one team that would take him for the right price, I mean, I think the easy choice would be the Lakers because he's of course good buddies with LeBron and they're like banana boat buddies, and I know they've even discussed the playing together. There were even reports like what was it, like a couple years ago, when the Cavs were trading Kyrie, you
Yep.
know, you sending Chris Paul to play with LeBron. Um, But then the one barrier with that right now is that Rondo is actually with the Lakers and he's on that team. He's the point guard, and definitely cannot see the Lakers having both Rondo and Chris Paul.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't really think of another contender. I mean, of course, Houston's out of the question now, and um, as a Clippers reunion, I mean, that obviously didn't that um, ending to that chapter did not go so hot like you mentioned. Um, so yeah, just kind of going down the list, I can't really see. Of course the Jazz, they have Conley now. Uh, Denver maybe.
San Antonio?
Oh, actually, yeah, I didn't think about that. Hmm.
I don't know how
Actually,
they. Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I don't know if San Antonio would be able to make the money work without giving up like a DeRozan or Aldridge, but um, I do think that would be very fascinating. Chris Paul in the final kind of chapter, teaming up with not teaming up, but playing for Popovich, a guy that he had so many went to war against so many times.
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't think about that, but that might be one of his, like, if he wants to have like a Jason Kidd style finish to his career. I mean, that might be the place to go if he can, if they obviously they can fit him in, they can make it work, and if he's able to sort of choose his own team, that could
Yeah.
be the best of both worlds. So
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you. I think the money attached to his contract right now makes it incredibly tough to A, move him, and B, move him to a contender. So
mhm.
I wonder how that negotiation is going to go. If OKC talks to him about a potential buyout. So let's say he does get bought out, like, and he can choose where he's gonna go, and it's solely about basketball and not about how much a team's gonna pay him. I do wonder, like, honestly, I do wonder if he could have a Jason Kidd kind of final chapter where he's playing alongside a superstar, so he does not have to be the uh, primary focus, and he can just be a guy who plays, competes on the defensive end, hits open spot up threes, sets guys up, and like is that veteran leader, that veteran presence and leader that every NBA team wants. I wonder, like, I don't know, like, don't you feel like if you put, let's say Chris Paul gets bought out, I feel like if you put him on, I don't know, like Philly or Milwaukee, I feel like those teams could go to another level.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about Milwaukee, but yeah, I mean, yeah, there's still so much intrigue, and he still brings so much to the table, and like you said, I mean, he could certainly sort of uh, transition his game, and he's a pretty good shooter. I could see him being, as he gets older, a good spot up shooter, of course, setting people up and still being a smart defender. So, oh yeah, I mean, Milwaukee would be good. Philly, if they can make it work with fitting him next to Ben Simmons. Um, yeah, I mean, there's options. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of, like, yeah, what's his contract situation, and if he can himself choose the team, I think he'll certainly have some attractive destinations. So, yeah, I guess the story continues with Chris Paul's career. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, obviously it's not over, but I'm sure he's got to be thinking to himself like, this is the last window that I have to like play at at like a decent at a high level. He's still a top 50 player, even
Oh yeah,
even if he's not Chris Paul of 4 years ago, but he's still a top 50 player. But like on top of that, like he's got to be looking and thinking like, this is the last time I can contribute to a championship team. Like maybe in 5 years he could just sign with a team and then they, kind of be like the seventh man, eighth man. But like this is his last chance to actually be, a pivotal player, like like a starter and like a meaningful contributor on a title team. So I do wonder if like he's kind of willing to take a little bit more of a back seat and play to use his IQ, but just still be a smart player, but use it to play to a more to be more of like a very effective role player. Kind of like I said, kind of like what we saw from Jason Kidd towards the end. I really think that that Jason Kidd trajectory is what he should be kind of thinking about if he wants to be a champion before he retires.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely the most ideal scenario for him right now, given how his career's gone, given where he's at. So, I mean, hey, maybe he should go to Dallas then, just like Jason Kidd.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would actually be interesting, kind of pairing him up with Luca and Kristaps, seeing how that fits.
Yeah. They might be too young for his time frame, but
Yeah.
Who knows? Interestingly, you brought up the possibility of him kind of taking a pay cut and then going to the Lakers. Interestingly, Steve Nash did the same thing, and it didn't quite work out for Steve Nash when he thought he was forming a super team in LA. Unfortunately, I was, just for context, I'm a big Kobe fan, so back then I was rooting for the Lakers. So I remember seeing Steve Nash on the ticker. Steve Nash is going to the Lakers, and it came out of nowhere. But I was like, yo, smart, pass first, selfless guy next to Kobe. Like let's do this thing, man. And obviously it didn't work out, and that's I felt bad, not only as like the part of me rooting for Kobe, but also I really felt bad for Nash. But that's neither here nor there. But I do think that's kind of funny. Like, what if Chris Paul goes on the same route as Steve Nash, but it just doesn't work out? But before I let you go, let's say I'm going to pose one last question to you, and I'm sure you can probably guess what I'm about to ask you. But let's say you are Chris Paul, you get bought out, and you get to choose where you're playing. Where are you deciding to go, and why?
Huh. Well, dang. Yeah, that's a tough one because you brought up Milwaukee and San Antonio, and I didn't think about those two before, but I mean those two seem like the most very attractive options. I would probably go with Milwaukee. Um, Big reason would be to go to the Eastern Conference. Even though the Eastern Conference, I'm not gonna crap on it. It's gonna be competitive. I would say Eastern Conference will have a very good opportunity to win it all. One of the teams in the East, but the West is just so stacked as always. And I think for Chris Paul, given where he's at in his career, if he has a chance to kind of get out of that, and he's been in the West his entire career, like that's New Orleans, the Clippers, the Rockets. So I mean, if he has a chance to get out of that, kind of change things up, go to the East, go to Milwaukee, play with of course the reigning MVP, on reigning number one seed, and they're looking to take the next step, and so it would be really pretty good for both sides. And I think that would really boost their chances of sort of running it back, because without him, I mean, they lost Brogdon, and I think people expect Milwaukee to take a step back, and a lot of people are high on Philly, but with him, that would be as a very, very tight matchup. So yeah, Milwaukee would be my choice.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like when you were kind of talking about, when you were talking about how Chris Paul could transition to this kind of be, this effective role player on a title team, I was thinking like, dang, put him next to Giannis, and like, honestly though, like, I would be Milwaukee. Just imagine if you're Milwaukee and Eric Bledsoe is he's really good in the regular season, but then let's say he has a couple poor performances in the playoffs. Like during those games, if you can just take him out and put in Chris Paul, like you're not losing too much defensively. you might be losing like athleticism and whatnot, but like I feel like you're replacing a lot of that with IQ, and you know, I just feel like that's the kind of presence you got to put next to Giannis at the a guy initiating the offense with Giannis. Um, yeah, so I definitely think Milwaukee. This is all, of course, assuming that he is bought out and that he can just sign wherever he chooses without having to worry about the money. Um, yeah, I think very curious to see just kind of this final phase of his career.
Yeah, same. There's a lot of possibilities, and I thought after that trade with that OKC and Houston and in our last pod, I expected that the Chris Paul move would happen sooner, but of course it still hasn't happened yet. So it definitely seems like still like a sort of a slow moving process. So I guess there's suspense with that. That's what we're all sort of waiting for.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to start the season out with OKC, and then they're hoping that he can increase his trade value and be like a good mentor for a lot of the young guys in OKC. We'll see, but I don't know, man. If you're Chris Paul, and knowing Chris Paul, we know that there's nothing he wants more than to win a championship, and so it's like the clock is ticking, man. So it's like you don't know how many good years you got left. So if I were him, I'd be thinking like, all right, how am I getting to a contending situation as soon as possible? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know. I mean, he's a professional and he's getting paid many millions of dollars. But if I were in his position, it's tough to kind of like see yourself like really truly buying into playing for OKC this year, knowing like you're gonna be behind the eight ball for pretty much the whole season, and if you don't end up being moved this season, your title chances are pretty much slim to none. So yeah, that's gotta be tough. So, but well, I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. Very excited to see what happens, and I don't want to keep you up too much longer. So I'm gonna kind of wrap things up. I want to thank you. Just want to say thanks for kind of hopping on, kind of super last minute. I was just like, hey, you trying to do a quick podcast, so I appreciate you, carving up a little bit of time, so on the fly to join me and talk about, this looming NBA discussion.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. Appreciate you having me once again, and definitely always good to talk hoops. And yeah, Chris Paul was certainly a very good subject to sort of pick and kind of talk about exclusively. So I'm definitely glad we did this. We'll see what. Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting storyline. So, but yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a good talk.
Yeah, and to the listeners, I want to once again thank you for listening. You'll be able to hear. I'm sure I'm gonna have Sid on very soon, so I'm like, needless to say, I'm sure if you enjoyed kind of hearing his analysis and our conversation, you'll be able to hear that hopefully very soon, especially when the NBA season starts to creep up on us. But yeah, once again, thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the SplashTag Podcast on whatever medium you're listening to it on, whether it's SoundCloud, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And once again, I want to thank you for listening, and we'll catch you soon.